Welcome to New Atlas Live. I'm Brian Berletic. As you can see, I'm doing this live stream for the moment, solo. It's kind of my fault. I was feeling a little ill in the middle of the week, and I wasn't really sure if I was going to do a live stream today or not. I decided to go ahead with it anyway, and Angelo was already committed to something. I've sent out some invites to a couple of people, have no idea whether they're going to pop in or not, but regardless, there's still a lot to talk about in the comment section. Please let me know if my audio is working and if everything seems to be going as it should be. And remember, all throughout the program, just put your questions in the comment, use a capital Q or question in all caps, so that I can see it easily, and then I will star it, and then I will answer it once it comes to time to do questions and answers. So where should we start today? I think I want to start on this weekend. I have been working on a number of articles and videos for this week and next week about the U.S. war on Russia in Ukraine. It's confrontation, it's growing confrontation with China. And one of the articles was about this specifically. This is U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio talking about peace, the peace talks with Russia, and the U.S. is frustrated. Hold on a second. Oh, that's right. Today is actually Easter. I want to wish everybody a happy Easter who celebrates. And very recently, it was Songkran, which is Thai New Year here in Thailand. I want to wish all my Thai supporters and friends a happy Songkran. So getting back to this. U.S. will abandon Ukraine peace efforts within days if no progress made, Rubio warns. And if you read through all of this and other articles like it, like this other one from CNN, Trump administration ready to recognize Russian control of Crimea as part of framework to end Ukraine war, source says. And that sounds good. But then down here it says U.S. proposal for an end to the war would also put a ceasefire in place along the front lines of the conflict, the source told CNN. And then as the U.S. is doing all of that, we still have Europe doing this. U.S. and France convene first defense ministers Ukraine coalition of the willing meeting. And I don't know if people remember, over the last 3 years, myself, many other analysts, we're talking about a coalition of the willing as being the next step the collective West might take in a bid to try to turn the tide of this losing proxy war, sending troops to go in and confront Russia directly, or trying to implement some sort of buffer zone, a Syria-style buffer zone in what is left of Ukrainian-held territory. And so a lot of people will say, well, this is just Europe trying to sabotage President Trump and his deep desire for peace in Ukraine. But in reality, this is simply Europe doing exactly what the U.S. government told them to do. And I hate to keep harping on this, but this was from February 12th, 2025. This is the U.S. Department of Defense, U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. And what we remember this conversation. I'm going to actually drop the link in the comment section right now so people can take a look at this if they want while I'm talking about it. And what is he talking about? He's talking about sending European and non-European troops into Ukraine to do exactly that, create a buffer zone controlled by Western troops in Ukraine that Russia would have to confront and fight if they wanted to move into that territory, exactly like what they did in Syria. He also talks about literally doubling down on support for Ukraine, having Europe ramp up their own military industrial production and continue sending weapons and ammunition to Ukraine. And of course, what else does he say? He talks about NATO. NATO is the core issue driving this war. It's not a war between Ukraine and Russia. It is a war between the U.S. and Russia, and the U.S.'s use of NATO to encircle, contain, encroach upon and contain Russia, and eventually absorb Russia itself. And this is what Russia is reacting to. And a lot of people pointed out that President Trump may be, if you see me stopping it so I can start these questions. A lot of people pointed out to me that President Trump, while he was campaigning ahead of the elections, did talk about NATO and its expansion being a core issue driving this conflict. But now that he's in office, what is he talking about in regards to NATO? Is he talking about dismantling it, stripping it down, withdrawing from Eastern Europe? No, he's telling NATO members they need to more than double their funding for NATO, expanding NATO capabilities, expanding NATO funding. And so this is not a bid to reach some sort of peace in Ukraine. It is a bid to freeze the conflict and force Russia to remain committed, fully committed to Ukraine, as the U.S. Has already successfully overthrown the Syrian government. It is now waging war on Yemen, and it is openly preparing for war against Iran. And aside from that, also this growing trade war and preparations for actual war with China. We'll get into that later. Since I talked about Iran, I just want to jump over to this. Israel said to be mulling limited attack on Iran nuke sites, despite Trump waving off plan. This is the plan. This is the plan. The plan is for the U.S. to pretend they want peace with Iran and to have Israel do America's dirty work, make it look like Israel did it unilaterally. Israel sabotaged U.S. peace talks. The U.S. has no interest in peace with Iran, has no business even talking to or about Iran. It's on the other side of the globe. It's none of America's business. The whole point that it is antagonizing Iran, threatening Iran over its supposed nuclear program is in and of itself ridiculous. And it illustrates who is at the core of this problem. It is not Iran. It is the United States and the nations that it controls in the region, including Israel, including Turkey, who participated in the overthrow of Syria. And to illustrate this, and I know I've done this often, a lot of people ask me for this link. I'm going to drop this in the comment section too. This is the Brookings Institution, Which Path to Persia? Options for a New American Strategy Toward Iran. At this point, it's not a new strategy. It's a very old strategy, but they're still obviously implementing it. It's published in 2009. And I've talked extensively about this. The link is now in the comments. So check that out. You can download it. It's a PDF. Download it, save it, read through it. As you can see, it's 170 pages. So I don't blame people for not having read through it in its entirety. But let's just jump around real quick. So we just saw Israel is going to strike Iran, and the U.S. doesn't want this to happen. They want peace with Iran, but Israel's going to ruin it all. Let's see what this 2009 paper said about that. Let's see, where is it? Chapter 5, Leave It to Bibi. And they're talking about Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, allowing or encouraging an Israeli military strike. So by encouraging, the difference between allowing and encouraging is exactly what they're talking about here. Pretending to wave it off, but encouraging them behind the scenes encouraging and enabling them to do it behind the scenes. So this is exactly what they're doing as per this very old now policy paper published in 2009. And the part of it is right here. I actually have a couple of select quotes that I extracted out of it. Maybe this is easier for people to read. I'll drop the link to this article. This is one of my old articles. I wrote this when 2012, I was still using the pen name Tony Cartolucci. I still did not come out and write and do videos under my real name. Tony Cartolucci was one of several pen names that I used. And we have a couple of quotes here, and they talk all about how the U.S. has to pretend to pursue diplomacy, sabotage diplomacy, make it out as if Iran was responsible for it, to then justify more extreme measures against Iran. And we could see the U.S. using this exact same strategy against Iran with the fake peace talks the Trump administration is engaged in with Russia. And they're also doing this vis-a-vis China with the trade war, the tariffs, and the preparation for real war with China. So let's just read one of these quotes here. It would be far more preferable if the United States could cite an Iranian provocation as justification for airstrikes before launching them. Clearly, the more outrageous, the more deadly, and the more unprovoked the Iranian action, the better off the United States would be. Of course, it would be very difficult for the United States to goad Iran into such a provocation without the rest of the world recognizing this game. They admit that Iran does not want to fight with the US or Israel, and that they would have to goad Iran into fighting with them. But they have to be careful the way they do it, because they don't want the rest of the world to see that it is the US provoking this, not Iran. And they admit that that would undermine it completely. One method that would have some possibility of success would be to ratchet up covert regime change efforts in the hope that Tehran would retaliate overtly or even semi-overtly, which could then be portrayed as an unprovoked act of Iranian aggression. And we see the US do this so many times against so many different nations around the globe, and they are openly admitting it in this policy paper that they are confident ordinary people will not read, or if they do read it, they won't understand it. Or hopefully they'll stop reading it before they reach this. It's already page 84, 85 of the report. Let's continue reading. I think it's very helpful for people to see these quotes instead of trying to read the whole paper yourself, just a few select quotes. By the way, this is my website. It's landsdestroyer.blogspot.com. That is what I used to call my media operation before I called it the new Atlas. Has the new Atlas logo at the top, but it's still landdestroyer.blogspot.com. I have to change that. I have to get with the times here. Let's continue. In a similar vein, any military operation against Iran will likely be very unpopular around the world and require the proper international context, both to ensure the logistical support the operation would require and to minimize the blowback from it. The best way to minimize international opprobrium, that's a fancy word, and maximize support, however grudging or covert, is to strike only when there is widespread conviction. See, widespread conviction, not widespread certainty. They're talking about convincing the world that this happened, not actually proving that it happened, that the Iranians were given but then rejected a superb offer, or you could say deal, or maybe a nuclear deal. One so good that only a regime determined to acquire nuclear weapons and acquire them for the wrong reasons would turn it down. Under those circumstances, the United States or Israel, it's right there in parentheses, that this is a direct quote from the paper, could portray its operations as taken in sorrow, not anger, and at least some in the international community would conclude that the Iranians brought it on themselves by refusing a very good deal. You could see how this is exactly how they put together the Iran nuclear deal. This was proposed by the Obama administration after this paper was published, by the way. And the moment it was proposed, I was warning people about this paper and the fact that this was all a plan to draw Iran in, pretend the US wanted diplomacy. They would then sabotage the deal, blame it on Iran, and then use that as an excuse to apply pressure, additional pressure on Iran, or even go to war with Iran. And that is exactly what the US did. The Obama administration signed this with Iran, half-heartedly implemented it. The Trump administration, just to give you an idea of continuity of agenda and how each administration plays its role in turn. They do not have independent policies. They are given their policy to oversee and sell to the American people. That's their primary job. The Trump administration, the first Trump administration, unilaterally walked away from the deal. No evidence given, no even real reason given. They simply walked away from the deal, and then they began applying maximum pressure. And from that point onward, we have seen this growing militarization, the growing conflicts, not only regime change operations in Syria, but attacks on Iran itself, the strikes that killed Hezbollah's senior leadership, and the current U.S. war being waged against Ansar Allah in Yemen right now. And so this is the plan still. So now President Trump, his second administration, I got to start some of these questions. He's in his second administration. And now he's talking about another deal with Iran, and they're doing it exactly for this purpose, to make it look like the U.S. wanted peace. And you all, I'm sure, everyone in the comment section, everyone watching this live or even after the broadcast, you know people out there who are utterly convinced President Trump wants peace with the rest of the world, wants to withdraw from global empire and make America great again. You know those people, who they are. And they still buy this. And they think President Trump genuinely wants peace with Iran. They're trying to work out some deal, even though they have no right to even talk about this topic with Iran. It's not America's duty, responsibility, or obligation to police what Iran is doing in its region of the planet within its own sovereign borders. Unless the UN says otherwise, and the UN has not said anything of the sort. So this is what President Trump, his administration, is doing. A continuation of this policy paper from all the way back in 2009, written by the most neocons that there are, and who have served neocon administrations. And President Trump himself has surrounded himself with neocons during his first administration and now this administration. So that is what they're doing. They are trying to appear diplomatic while setting up an unprovoked war with Iran. And they're willing to do it via Israel. I see people still trying to convince me that AIPAC controls Congress. Please go add up the money AIPAC spends on Congress, and then add up just what the defense industry alone spends on Congress. And you will see that doesn't even come close to what just the defense industry spends on buying off Congress. Okay. Lobbyists are used for many different reasons. A lot of US proxies have lobbyists and lobbying groups. That is how they interact with Washington. That is how the modern day imperial court the US maintains operates. Just because they have lobbyists doesn't mean they actually control Congress. You have lobbying groups from Taiwan, from Ukraine. The US-backed opposition here in Thailand uses lobbyists to interact with Washington. They do not control Washington. Very important to understand that. And so that's where we are. And now, yes, here, let me start putting some of these comments up on the screen too. This one is a good one. Trump is fake revolution? That is a question, and the answer is yes, absolutely. How could you be leading a revolution against the deep state when you have surrounded yourself an administration full of deep state facilitators? I was just talking about Marco Rubio, arch neocon. Marco Rubio has been behind every single war ever. He is foaming at the mouth for war with Iran and with China, and he can barely hide his smile, his smirk, when he's pretending to seek peace with Russia during these talks regarding Ukraine. I want to show you this, Project 2025. I have been talking about Project 2025 a lot, even though it was actually published in 2023. A lot of people say, if you go down to the bottom of this Project 2025, you will see that it's part of the Heritage Foundation, which is just one of many corporate financier-funded think tanks, like Brookings, like CSIS, like the Rand Corporation, Council on Foreign Relations. If you go through the table of contents, you can see, and you just click on these. I'll put this in the comment section too. Just check it out. Check some of these papers out. There's a lot of them. You could spend a month or two just going over all of these papers. But the Department of Defense lays out the entire policy of taking the war in Ukraine, dumping it on Europe, and then pivoting towards China, which is exactly what the Trump administration is doing. The Department of State right here, it talks all about how the U.S. needs to take all of these U.S. aid. It actually has it down here too. U.S. Agency for Global Media, which oversees Voice of America, Radio Free Asia, Radio Free Europe, Corporation for Public Broadcasting. All of this needs to be cut down and consolidated directly under the State Department, not to dismantle it, not to get rid of it, but to sharpen it, to streamline it, and to make it a more effective weapon for the State Department to use in pursuit of American empire abroad. And it talks about the Department of Education, about how that should be eliminated. That is literally in there. You can read it and see for yourself. And if we come down here, trade talks all about tariffs. The whole plan of Trump's tariffs are not Trump's tariffs at all. They are the Heritage Foundation's plan for for tariffs. It is the deep state's plan to use tariffs to maintain American dominance. And it even says it down here. This is how it opens up. This is the first paragraph. These are quotes. This is the first actual paragraph of this paper. It says, the United States of America is the world's dominant superpower and remains the world's arsenal of democracy. To maintain that global positioning and thereby best protect the homeland and our democratic institutions, it is critical that the United States strengthen its manufacturing and defense industrial base at the same time that it increases the reliability and resilience of its globally dispersed supply chains. So they're not talking about onshoring everything. They're talking about making everything stronger, more efficient to maintain American dominance worldwide. They're not talking about withdrawing within the US where the US should mind its business. They're talking about using all of these tools to continue dominating the rest of the planet. It's not about making America great again for Americans. It's about making these corporate monopolies great again and preserving their empire worldwide. Who wrote this? Peter Navarro. I've had people tell me, Brian, Project 2025 has nothing to do with Trump at all. Aside from the fact that President Trump is now implementing all of these policies almost line by line from Project 2025, he's also taken Peter Navarro and has literally made him a senior counselor for trade and manufacturing. He's overseeing this policy that he wrote a chapter in Project 2025 all about. So Project 2025 is the blueprint for the deep state and for the Trump administration, which serves that deep state, if you want to call it that. Now let's see. Let me check through the comments. It's so much easier when I have a co-host to keep track of the comments. So if I miss your question this time, I apologize. It's because it's very hard to do all of this on my own. And so since we're talking about tariffs, maybe we should look at a few of the different things going on about that recently. So I think some people may have saw the Wall Street Journal report saying U.S. plans to use tariff negotiations to isolate China. And so now, do you remember? Many people were saying, no, this is to reindustrialize America. This is to save American jobs. People are asking, where's Angelo? I did this live stream at last minute. I wasn't feeling well over the course of last week. And he didn't think that I was going to do a stream. I made it seem as if I wasn't. And so he has other commitments. But he will be back next week, almost certainly. So this is evidence. This is evidence that this has nothing to do with helping Americans, reindustrializing America. You don't need massive, unprecedented, almost war-starting tariffs like this to reindustrialize the United States. If you were serious about reindustrializing the United States, which I think the U.S. should do, you would invest money in education, and you'd have to completely reform education. You would have to invest huge amounts of money in infrastructure. Instead of the global military that you are maintaining, you'd have to cut all of that out, which they're not, and you would have to take all of that $1 trillion budget, this administration, $1 trillion defense budget. You would take that and you would spend $1 trillion on building infrastructure inside and across the United States. And then you would have to nationalize certain industries that are essential for quality of life in the United States, like healthcare, pharmaceutical industries. You could still have private pharmaceutical corporations, but you should have a government pharmaceutical organization like they do here in Thailand that makes everything at cost. They make enough money to cover their expenses and to pay their employees, but they keep the cost down as low as possible so that every single person in the country can afford medication. They don't have to choose between paying their bills and staying healthy. They get to do both. What a novel idea. They can do it here in Thailand, but they can't do it in the United States. I refuse to believe that. And people will say, but Brian, UK and Canada, they have universal healthcare and it's a complete failure. It's a complete failure because you cannot have universal healthcare without nationalizing healthcare completely. You cannot pay these corporations what they are asking for their medication, their healthcare equipment, and provide universal healthcare to your population. It just doesn't work. These corporations are profiteering. They are gouging the government and they are gouging the public with these prices. It does not cost that much to make this medication, to make this equipment. I know this for a fact because I could see other countries doing this at cost and it actually works. And so what Canada and the UK would have to do is get these private corporations out of the picture, nationalize the production of pharmaceuticals, and then buy it that way. And then you could afford it, and then it would work efficiently. Other countries have actually done this, and it works. And the interesting thing about Thailand is that they also do allow private corporations to sell medication, and consumers get to pick between at cost made by the government or overpriced garbage from these corporations. You're still given the choice. But I'm digressing. I'm off the point. The point is, those are the things the US would have to do to reindustrialize America and to improve the quality of life for Americans, to get the cost of living crisis that is spiraling out of control back under control. There should be a balance between private corporations and nationalized industry that allows competition, but also ensures that essentials are there for people to use, so that they don't have. I know personally Americans who have to pick between seeing a doctor, paying their bills, filling their gas tank, and buying good quality food. They have to pick and choose. They cannot do all of the above. Here in Thailand, everybody could do all of the above. So it's very obvious that's not what the US is doing. They are, and I've warned about this, they are applying these tariffs to isolate China. And in this article, they're talking about 70 nations, which means white Western nations that the US controls, and nations the US controls outside of the collective West: Japan, South Korea, Australia, which is a Western country, but on the other side of the planet. And what they're going to do is the exact same thing they did to Russia with sanctions. They are trying to isolate and cut off China, just like they tried to isolate and cut off Russia. And this is actually something the Duran was talking about in a recent video. Alex and Alexander of the Duran were saying that this looks less like a plan to reindustrialize America and more like a repeat of the Biden administration's policy to isolate Russia, except instead of using sanctions to isolate Russia, you're using tariffs to isolate China. And on that, I agree with them completely. It doesn't look like that. That is exactly, literally what the US administration is doing right now. I also, let me check some of the questions. Since we don't have a co-host, I can kind of jump around. Let's see. That is a joke. Let me see. Let's see here. These are just at random. Let's just take care of some of these now before the end of the show. Why are the most pro-Palestine countries like China, Iran, Russia either ignored or demonized by most pro-Palestine activists? Isn't the whole movement in the US and EU a NGO, CIA, PSYOP? Yes, it is. A lot about the Palestinian movement is a PSYOP, I guess you could say, or controlled opposition, or a deliberate strategy of tension. I've talked about this many times. Hamas itself is an extension of the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood was created by the British Empire as a means of dividing and ruling the Arab world, and it is still used for that purpose to this day. All of the opposition groups, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, they all sprung out of the Muslim Brotherhood. At one point, Hamas was actually supporting the US-backed and armed terrorists in Syria, trying to overthrow the Syrian government. At one point, they were fighting alongside them. And as this question is pointing out, many people in the pro-Palestine movement are anti-Russia, anti-China, anti-Iran. And if you look at, certain, not everyone, but certain pro-Palestinian personalities on social media, you will see them disparaging Iran and cheering on the collapse of the Syrian government, as this is what the British Empire and now the US Empire is doing. They have divided people along sectarian lines, pitting them against one another so that they can't actually see what's really going on and work together to fight the US collectively. This is what the US did when they went into Iraq. At first, Sunni and Shia Muslims were working together to expel the Americans. And then they started the so-called Civil War, where they had these terrorist groups. They were bringing them in, and they, instead of attacking the Americans, they were using them to get the Sunni and Shia groups to attack and kill each other. And this relieved pressure off the U.S. occupation and just burned the country alive from the inside out. And they have been doing the same thing all throughout the Palestinian resistance for decades. In many ways, Israel and the United States, and look at who the primary financial sponsors of Hamas are. It's not Iran. It's all the Persian Gulf states that the US has politically captured and is coercing. And so think about that carefully. And a lot of these are the same Persian Gulf states that were aiding the US in the proxy war against Syria. So you have to follow the money. You have to take your emotions out of all of this and follow the money. And if you do that, you will understand that a lot of this is controlled, captured opposition and a strategy of tension. They want Israelis and Palestinians to hate each other forever, keep the violence going for as long as possible. There's no genuine interest in peace there, not within the US, not within Israel, even within a lot of groups in Palestine. They don't want peace. And this allows the US to use all of this as justification to maintain its military support for Israel as a proxy of US interests in the region. And it allows the US itself to maintain its military presence all over the region. Let's see, let's go to some others. That's a good question, though. It's good to question these things. And let's see, we have an election this month. What should people do politically? It seems so hopeless. Another good question. It's a question that's very difficult to answer. If if you're in the United States or in Europe, your government, both sides, every party serves these corporate financier special interests. So voting for them is almost pointless. You could vote for certain parties as a kind of a protest vote. This party has been in power. You vote the other party to punish that one, to show the system that you're displeased. Not that they care, but maybe it'll put pressure on them. They will feel that they're losing control over popular opinion. But what you have to understand is if it is these corporate financier interests driving all of this, if it is these Fortune 500 corporations funding these think tanks, developing these policies in the first place, you need to find ways to cut them off from their source of power, which is ultimately all of us. If every month we are taking our paycheck and paying it into these corporations, that is enabling them to maintain this power over all of us and over Western policy, foreign and domestic. It's not something that you can do 100% overnight, but if you could just, if everyone just worked collectively to just reduce by a few percentage points every month, spending locally, spending on alternatives. Now there's so many companies and corporations, unless they're banned in your country, like Huawei in the United States, start sending your money, spending your money, investing your money on multipolarism and less on these established Western corporate monopolies. I mean, that's one thing you can do. Alternative media is another thing that you can do. Local activism, where you're actually trying to help organize and build up your local community, that is something else you can do. Voting, again, you could do it as a form of protest, but beyond that, it really is useless. Invest in multipolarism. That is what is taking on and challenging this corrupt establishment. And how did they do that? By creating their own alternatives. They're not complaining at the UN. They took, you see the oil industry, telecom, all of these different forms of technology, and the multipolar world started creating their own versions of all of this. They stopped investing in the West's monopolies. They created their own interests and concerns, and they are building them up, and they are displacing the West's control and domination over the world. And in Western countries, this can be done on a local and regional level also. It's not going to be easy, but it's something that can be done. It'll take time, but just remember, this problem wasn't created overnight. You're not going to solve it overnight. Let's see some other questions. Check the comment section. Yes, this is a good comment right here. As long as billionaires control news, media, and propagandize mass population, democracy and voting is meaningless. Unfortunately, people vote same party again and again, expect different results. That is absolutely true. That is part of the problem. We just watched the Biden administration continue all of President Trump's policies. We watched President Trump in his first administration continue all of the Obama administration's policies. And now from Biden to Trump, everything continues uninterrupted. And you can see people, and these aren't dumb people. These are smart people, and they're honest people too. They see it, and they have pinned their hope on the possibility of change to such an extent that they're trying to rationalize and avoid accepting the fact that that change is not coming, that they were lied to, that President Trump does not represent change. He represents continuity of agenda, just as he did during his first term in office. And so, yes, billionaires do control the news. This is why the alternative media is so important. And alternative media and alternatives for everything within the so-called deep state, if you want to use that terminology. Let's see. Here's another one. Do you think the U.S. is trying to secure the Iran situation to bypass confronting them and go for China in their efforts to destroy BRICS? Well, the thing is, secure the Iran situation in what way? The U.S. obviously doesn't want peace with Iran. They do not want Iran developing nuclear weapons, not because they're worried they will use them, but because they know it'll be the end of any opportunity to create regime change by force, either directly or through their proxies, including using Israel. And so this is what they're trying to prevent. They do not want Iran to end up like North Korea. Has North Korea used its nuclear weapons? No. Has China used its nuclear weapons? No. Has Russia used its nuclear weapons? No. The only nation on planet Earth that has ever used nuclear weapons against other human beings is the United States. They did it twice during World War II against Japan, and they actually seriously considered using them many times after that. During the Korean War, during the Vietnam War, and even as recently as the war in Afghanistan. Yes, but this Iran is part of BRICS. That's the thing. This is why they are obsessed with Iran, Russia, and China. All of these are problems that are happening for the U.S. empire at the same time. They're trying to deal with all of them all at the same time. As I have said, Rashid, who comes on the live stream often, Angelo, as we've said many times, the U.S. is running out of time. The world is changing very rapidly now. All of the advantages the United States had for decades are now dissipating, and they're in a rush to reassert dominance over the planet. And there's actually a lot of factors behind this. I would say one of the central factors is the proliferation of technology. During the Industrial Revolution, which began in the West and spread across the West, this gave the West tremendous advantage over all other nations around the globe. It was not that the Westerners were inherently superior, but if you have guns, you have ships made out of iron and steel, and you go up against a civilization that did not have the need to innovate to that extent, and they're still using spears and bows and arrows, obviously the collective West is going to roll right over them. That is what they did all across Latin America, the Americas, North and South, the African continent, parts of Asia. But around World War I and World War II, that technology began proliferating. Japan started modernizing. China, in many ways, began. Many nations around the world realized that if they did not want to become colonies of the collective West, all of these different Western empires, they would have to modernize. They would have to catch up. And so they invested in all of that. Let's see. They invested in all of that, and now they've caught up. China has now surpassed the collective West in terms of technology, research and development, technology, infrastructure, manufacturing. The US realizes this. There's a small and closing window in their mind. They think they can reverse this. Maybe they can. I don't know. That is what they're trying. That is what they're trying to do. They're trying to reverse that. Let me see here. See what's going on in the question. Let's see some questions here. There's some questions here. I don't really know what people are trying to ask. Let's see. How about this? Is the U.S. crashing its own economy to create a pool of young, desperate people who will be willing to join the military? Well, I think that is going to be. I think that is going to be a possible consequence of crashing its economy. When if your goal is to revitalize the American economy and reindustrialize it, you don't need tariffs like this. You would pick specific industries and use tariffs to protect them while you're building them up. You don't have the ability to do all of it all at once. You don't need to do it all at once. Again, the urgency that they seem to have is not because they're in such a desperate bid to make America great again for the American people. It's because they see their empire dying and they're trying to reassert dominance over the planet. That's why they're doing it. And they're willing to destroy their own economy, at least for the ordinary American people in the process, because they don't care about the American people. President Donald Trump does not care about the American people. He is a billionaire himself. His friends are all billionaires. He does not care about the American people. If he did, he would not have surrounded himself by parasitic neocon warmongers who are continuing America on this self-destructive path rather than reversing it and reforming it. Let's see, 2 more questions, and then I'll go back to the live comment stream. As war with China is imminent, how likely is it that it might go nuclear, considering there are B-2 bombers in Australia and U.S. proxies, Japan, South Korea getting militarily involved? It's impossible to tell. How likely is it that the war in Ukraine, from the very beginning, 2022, all the way up until now, many people were worried about nuclear weapons being used. I think both sides realize that any kind of nuclear war will be extremely destructive for both sides. The thing that is scary is that throughout the Cold War, and even right now at this moment, there are policymakers in the collective West who are trying to calculate whether an all-out nuclear exchange with, say, Russia or China, despite all of the damage it would do to the West, if on the outside of that, on the other side of that conflict, could they come out in a more advantageous position and reestablish their nation faster and better than their adversary? There was a movie about that or something, but that is based on real people who are really making those calculations, and that is scary. And this one, do you think divisions in Trump administration is for show? Yes, absolutely. For show, for making excuses, for trying to explain why this cannot happen. Ultimately, who picked the Trump administration. Who picked these people? President Trump picked these people. Do you remember when, before he picked his cabinet, and the name Marco Rubio was floating around, many extremely pro-Trump analysts and commentators were saying they didn't even believe it was true. They thought it was just this name Marco Rubio floating around was just to create division amongst the pro-Trump camp and try to undermine the Trump administration even before it got started. And then when it was confirmed that it was actually Marco Rubio who was going to be Secretary of State, they began making all of these excuses and brash. At first, they realized if Trump picks Rubio, that's it. He's doing the exact same thing he did his first administration. It's a bait and switch. Make America great again, neocon continuity of agenda. That was the bait and switch. And then he did it again. And these people didn't want to admit this. They didn't want to accept this. And so what they did was try to rationalize why he's picking this horrible human being who has done nothing positive for the United States throughout his entire political career. Why would he pick him to be Secretary of State? And a lot of people said, well, it's just to get him through the confirmation hearings. And then after that, President Trump will have full control over Marco Rubio. And if you really think about that, if you don't even have the ability to pick your administration, you're worried about getting people through the confirmation hearing. Once you get that person on the other side, if that person decides to side with those people that had to confirm him, this majority in the Senate and in the House of Representatives, what makes you think that person's going to side with you and your policies and not with the deep state? So it never made any sense. The most logical and probable explanation, and what is demonstrably true, is that President Trump lied to the American people. He told people what they wanted to hear to get their support, to keep Americans from divesting. People are asking, what do you do? What do you do during elections? What do we do to change it? Divest from the system, divest from the establishment, create alternatives, invest in alternatives. They don't want Americans doing that. They want them invested in at least half of this two-party corrupt system built for public perception. So he told you what you wanted to hear, and then as soon as he was elected and he's in office and there's nothing you could do about it, he just continued with the policies as President Biden had been doing for 4 years. So yes, there are no real divisions within the Trump administration. President Trump, if you listen to him carefully, J.D. Vance, his vice president, all of the people behind him, if you look at Project 2025, and even, let me share the screen again. And there was also the America First Institute, I think here, let me check, see where that is. America First, right here. You have to see this also. No, I'm not joining the America First agenda. The America First agenda, and they have all of these pillars instead of chapters. And if you read all of this, even before President Trump was elected, you would have known that this is all neocon continuity of agenda. There was never any plan to challenge or change any of this. People just heard what they wanted to hear. They ignored what they didn't want to hear, and they're still doing it. This is, people are talking about Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, OpenAI. You remember when Trump supporters were all up in arms about OpenAI, and then now they're handing them billions of dollars for Project Stargate. You remember that? So it's disparaging. It's disparaging. Wow, we're already at 49 minutes. This has gone by really fast, faster than I thought it would. Let's see. Let me see if there's some more questions. If you want to ask questions, now is the time where, basically for this show, I wanted to talk about Secretary Rubio pretending like the U.S. is some sort of mediator in America's war on Russia. Oh, I know what I wanted to add to that. Hold on just a moment. I want to show you, I know I've talked about this in the past. Others have talked about this article in the past. There's two New York Times articles. One I remember doing a video of? It was this one. Let me get this comment off the screen. This is a good question. The spy war, how the CIA secretly helped Ukraine fight Putin. And down here it says, for more than a decade. So this had nothing to do with the Russian special military operation. The United States has nurtured a secret intelligence partnership with Ukraine that is now critical for both countries in countering Russia. And they talk about how the CIA was building bases all along the Ukrainian-Russian border. And they're admitting that the US was using Ukraine. They didn't just politically capture Ukraine and install a client regime in Kiev. They institutionally captured its intelligence agencies and its military. That's what they admit in this article, this New York Times article. They talk about General Budanov and how he was part of this special unit the CIA created and was training. And they claim that there he is, Budanov, and they were saying, well, the CIA created it, but they were never supposed to do operations, armed operations against the Russians. But then they admit Budanov, as part of this CIA created and trained unit, got injured carrying out an armed attack on Russians in Russian-held territory. Just a moment. So there's that one. That was, when was this article? Let's take a look. This was 2024. And then there's this one. This is more recent. This is this year. This was March 29th, 2025. The Partnership, the secret history of the war in Ukraine. And I just wrote an article about this that will be published soon. And I did a video that will be released probably this coming Wednesday, sometime around then. And in this article, they admit, and you might remember, if you followed my work over the last 3 years, you might remember that I, myself, many other analysts have talked about how this was never a war between Ukraine and Russia. It was always a U.S. proxy war against Russia. And the U.S. has been involved in every aspect of the war from top to bottom. This was never about just helping Ukraine. This was always about the U.S. fighting Ukraine, fighting Russia, using Ukraine as intermediaries, just for plausible deniability. They did everything but directly fight Russia. And they admit in this New York Times article, there was this base in Germany that U.S. generals decided absolutely everything. They drew up the plans for the 2022 Kherson and Kharkov offensives. They drew up the plans for the 2023 offensive, which ended in absolute disaster. And they even admit in this article that in the opening phase of the 2023 offensive, the Ukrainians said, this is failing. Do you remember those heaps of burning Leopard 2 main battle tanks in the open fields that Russia mined? And it was obvious that it was failing right from the beginning. The Ukrainians said, this is failing. It was U.S. generals that told them to, and it literally says in here, maybe I'll just find it for you. They said, press on. And why did they say press on? Because they thought Ukraine had a chance of succeeding? No, because they were trying to exact the highest cost from Russia at Ukraine's expense and at no expense to America itself. That is a proxy war. When they said to the last Ukrainian, they meant to the last Ukrainian. So that's why they had a failed offensive, crumbling, thousands and thousands of troops being slaughtered, all of that equipment being destroyed, and they didn't care because they just wanted to exact the highest cost possible on Russia. They didn't care if it succeeded or not. It was always about extending Russia. And there's a Rand Corporation policy paper literally titled Extending Russia. And the whole point wasn't to win a war against Russia. It would have been great for them if they could. The point was to overextend them. And they put pressure on Russia, not just in Ukraine, but also in Syria, in regards to Iran and China, all across Central Asia, in the Arctic, everywhere they can. They put pressure on Russia, hoping that Russia will overextend itself and collapse like the Soviet Union did at the end of the Cold War. And they admit that it wasn't Ukraine who asked for ATACMS missiles. They admit that not only were U.S. generals picking every target and had final say on every target, including every single HIMARS strike, was overseen by U.S. generals, not Ukrainian commanders. When the offensive was failing, it was U.S. generals who demanded ATACMS. And do you remember how the Western media, they all knew that. but that they pretended like it was Ukraine pestering Washington for these long-range missiles. And then it's interesting, not everything in this New York Times article should be taken at face value, because as you read through it, you will see as the proxy war was failing, they tried to blame it more and more on infighting within Ukraine, infighting between the Ukrainians and their American handlers. At the end of the day, and at the end of the article, actually, they admit that this is all about the collective West running out of resources for this war of attrition Russia prepared better for and was imposing on Ukraine and their Western sponsors. So with all of that now in mind, going back to this, how absurd is it that Secretary of State Marco Rubio is pretending like the U.S. is mediating between Ukraine and Russia when this is America's war? This is America's war. It still is America's war under the Trump administration. Those drone strikes into Russia are only possible with the support of U.S. commanders and intelligence and other resources in Germany that have been used all throughout this war from 2022 up until now. So again, this is the Trump administration taking advantage of people's good faith, their faith in the Trump administration and all the promises he made. 1 second, just get some more of these questions. And this is the worst part about doing this solo. I cannot talk and get all these questions at the same time. That's why it's always great. It's also great to have guests on because they will always come up with interesting takes on things that I might not have thought about yet. Let's see. All right. Yes, if you're going to ask a question, it's much easier if you put capital Q or question in all caps and then your question. That way I can see it and start easier. Okay, so that's why this is ridiculous, because this, as the New York Times, and I'll put the archived article there so you can read it for yourself. It's a long article, but if you read this New York Times article, it makes it unavoidably clear that the U.S. is fighting a war with Russia through Ukraine. It's not a war between Ukraine and Russia. So if the U.S. wanted peace with Russia, all it has to do is end the proxy war it itself launched on Russia. They overthrew Ukraine in 2014 after spending years and billions of dollars trying to overthrow it since the end of the Cold War. They finally did, and they transformed Ukraine into a battering ram to use against Russia. The U.S. did that, not Ukraine. Ukraine, the client regime, answers to Washington for Washington. It has nothing to do. It has nothing to do with Ukrainian interests. Obviously, it doesn't serve their interests. And so, if the U.S. really wanted peace, that they could have peace at any moment. All they have to do is admit they did it, and they're going to stop doing it. But they're not. And so what conclusion can you draw when they pretend like they don't know what's going on? And remember, President Trump, during his first administration, he helped prepare and provoke that war with Russia. He was the one who openly began arming Ukraine. He still, to this day, brags about he was the one who started sending anti-tank missiles to Ukraine. So he participated in preparing for and provoking the war, and now he's pretending like this was all Joe Biden's doing, and he's just been handed this mess. And isn't that what President Obama did for 8 years, pretending he couldn't end all of Bush's wars and actually started all the wars Bush wanted to start but ran out of time to start? Isn't that the same excuse he used and his supporters used? Oh, President Obama is trying. He's trying so hard, but look at the mess that he was handed. And the Republicans are stonewalling him in Congress. He's trying, but he just can't do it. It's all lies. It's all perception management. It is continuity of agenda. And so that's what I meant to add. That's what I meant to add when I began talking about Secretary Rubio pretending like he's bored trying to talk peace between Russia and Ukraine, and they're just going to abandon peace. They never had peace in mind at all. And this is a 2004 article from The Guardian admitting that efforts to overthrow the Ukrainian government were 100%. It literally says the campaign is an American creation. And then the whole article is all about how they not only did that in Ukraine, they did it in Serbia, Belarus, and also Georgia. And as a matter of fact, regarding Georgia, they succeeded. They overthrew the government in 2003. From 2003 to 2008, they did the exact same thing. They reorganized, armed the military, encouraged them to attack Russian peacekeepers. I think it was around South Ossetia, which is disputed territory. And they precipitated the war in 2008 that even the EU investigated and concluded that Georgia, not Russia, started. And so that's what they did with Georgia. And then that's what they began doing with Ukraine from 2014 onward, but just on a much larger, more dangerous scale. This is why Russia reacted the way they are. And they're doing the exact same thing to China. Right now, under the Trump administration, they're pretending like this war with Russia is so wrong and Biden did this and that's all his fault. We had nothing to do with it. And we don't agree with that, while doing the exact same policy vis-a-vis China. And so it's entirely disingenuous. All right, we're at 1 hour. I'm going to go through the questions. There's 13 questions. If you ask a question at this point, I'm not going to see it because I'm in the question. There's like a live comment feed, and then there's starred comments. So I'm going to just start going through these comments in the order that I starred them. Why did Trump pretend to push for peace only to give up after this song and dance about pausing aid and talking to Russia? Well, the U.S. never paused aid, by the way. They just lied and said they did. All of the aid continued uninterrupted. All of the weapons continue to flow to Ukraine uninterrupted. It's all about perception management. They want you to think that President Trump wants peace with Russia, and it was Russia or someone else who sabotaged it, leaving the U.S. with only one choice, but to continue fighting the proxy war indirectly through Europe after Secretary Hegseth in February ordered them to double down on supporting Ukraine and also sending European troops into Ukraine to freeze the conflict. What is just a ploy? Was it just a ploy to get the EU to commit? The EU is politically captured by the US. They do whatever the US tells them. This whole thing about EU with tensions with Trump is also theater. Isn't the EU already captured? Yes, absolutely. So we can conclude then that it was all theater, perception management. I still hear people saying France and the UK are undermining Trump's peace efforts. The Trump administration told them to prepare troops to go into Ukraine. They're only doing exactly what Pete Hegseth told them to do in February. Okay. All right, let's go. Where can I go hide or at least have good quality of life? I would say in Asia. Asia is a great place. I live in Asia. I've traveled around Asia. China, the development is just through the roof. The last time I was in China was all the way back in 2006, 2007. And already then, it was very well developed. This was actually before they had high-speed trains. From 2006, where they were working on it, but none of the high-speed rail lines were complete, to today, they now have the largest high-speed rail network on planet Earth, serving billions of passengers every year. So China, pretty much anywhere in Asia. There's weak links in Asia. The U.S. is targeting Myanmar, for example. The Philippines is very impoverished because it has been politically captured by the U.S. for so long. I live here in Thailand. I think the quality of life here in Thailand is great. And I would say there's many countries in Southeast Asia that are very good. That might be worth thinking about. The West, the leadership there, they're doing it themselves. This is not something that has to happen. They can choose to learn lessons from China's rise instead of fighting to resist. It doesn't even make sense to try. China has a larger population, better infrastructure, better education. To look at China with a population larger than the G7 combined and saying the US should be more powerful than China would be like the UK complaining because they're not more powerful than the US, which has a much larger population larger country by land area, more resources, more industry. Just, it's irrational. What the US and the collective West are doing is irrational. They are convinced they're inherently superior and should run the show indefinitely. They do not accept anyone else doing it, especially doing it in a different way. I don't know if that answers the question or not. How about this one? Do you still consider yourself an American? America is dead as a country. It's a consumer society, and that's it. No people on earth are as selfish or vengeful or as the average American. I'm an American. I was born in America. I was raised in America. I am a product of the United States as it was throughout the 80s and 90s when I lived there. And I can never change that. And in America, there's 300 million people. The majority of these people are good people. People are people no matter where you go. Americans are not inherently selfish or vengeful. This is a mentality that is imposed upon them by a corrupt, failing system that oversees all of this. If the United States actually began investing in itself to make the United States as great a country as it can be, indifferent to what is going on around the globe, working with the rest of the world rather than trying to impose itself upon the rest of the world, it would be an incredible country to live in. And so that is the biggest tragedy of all of this. None of this has to happen. It's happening because the US itself has been politically captured by a small handful of incredibly powerful, but extremely corrupt, and I would say inept or short-sighted, narrow-minded megalomaniacs. Let's see. How about this? Do you think the drills between Egypt and China happened because they suspect this entire negotiation with Iran is BS and the US, Israel will attack Iran anyway? Well, the negotiations are absurd. The US has no intention of seeking peace with anyone on earth, as they have always done. They've done this with Russia. They have done this with China. I just wrote an article about the US One China policy, which recognizes Taiwan as part of China, while the US is openly backing separatism on Taiwan and has even deployed US troops to Taiwan. So they're illegally occupying Chinese territory, despite having agreed with China that Taiwan is part of China. So yes, these talks with Iran are also absurd. And it's, again, just as the Brookings Institution laid out, it's a means of convincing the world the US wanted diplomacy and it was Iran who chose war. So I don't know about these drills between Egypt and China, but I'm sure all parties involved understand this. Let's see this. Do you think Trump's attempted assassination was fake or real? Are the CIA controlled? Did the CIA control this because they allowed this assassination to happen? So please, could you explain? I don't know. I actually did a video on that. The Secret Service seems like it almost deliberately messed up. I mean, there was. I'm not a security expert. I was in the U.S. Marines. I know some things about security, basic things, just my basic understanding. I could see that the Secret Service completely failed that day. The United States is a nation in decline. Its social fabric is unraveling. It has very violent, irrational people detached from reality with access to guns. I don't think access to guns in and of itself is a bad thing, but when your social fabric is unraveling, of course, these kind of things are going to happen. And so I don't know if it's just a sign of the US unraveling or if it was done on purpose, if the Secret Service is just deteriorating and in decline like everything else in the United States. It's hard to tell. And when it's hard to tell, just admit it's hard to tell. It's impossible to tell why, what happens. I do know, though, that assassination attempt emotionally affected many, many Americans and non-Americans, convincing them that Trump was some sort of almost ordained by God savior that was going to salvage the United States and the collective West. And it almost makes you wonder whether that was done on purpose or not. But I have no evidence to suggest that it was. What can we do besides pray to Jesus? I talked about that. The multipolar world is doing something about this. The multipolar world is creating their own alternatives to this corrupt monopoly that the West has created over generations. They are creating their own thing, they're building it, and they're trying to find ways to defend it. And we all can find ways to help invest in that. We can't do it single-handedly, we can't do it overnight, but there are ways we can contribute. For example, you will never see me buying an Apple phone, for example. I'm not going to buy anything from a large US company if I can help it. That's just a small example. I mean, and you would say, well, what's the point of that? If everybody started doing that, and many people are starting to do that. Many people do buy Huawei and Xiaomi phones instead of Apple and other Western brands. And it does overall begin making a difference. Who controls Chinese banks? Is it true that major banks seem to be controlled by foreign shareholders? Well, there are foreign shareholders involved in Chinese companies, but ultimately, just like here in Thailand, there's always going to be local, sometimes government majority control. And if you look at what's going on with China, if these foreign shareholders were seeking to undermine China's rise, they're doing a very bad job of it, using their shares as leverage to do so. But that's something that we should probably all look deeper into. Again, like I always say, follow the money. Trump campaigned for peace upon becoming president. Did he change his mind? Was he made to change his mind? Did he never intend to pursue peace? It is C. He never intended to pursue peace. He spent 4 years as president already, continuing all of the wars he inherited from the Obama administration and attempted to trigger several more wars. He began preparing and provoking the war in Ukraine against Russia. He was provoking China in the Asia-Pacific region. He murdered a very popular Iranian general, Qasem Soleimani, who was fighting ISIS and Al-Qaeda across the entire region. And that was an act of war. And it was only because of Iran's restraint, not anything President Trump did, that war was avoided. And so he did that for 4 years straight, unrepentant, and now he's back in office doing the exact same thing. The answer is obviously C. He never intended. He just told people what they wanted to hear, and for some reason, they all choose to continue believing him, despite Syria being lied to over and over again. Question: do you think Israel and Egypt might go to war because China allegedly dropped military equipment in Egypt yesterday? No, but look, China makes huge amounts of military equipment, and they're selling it all over the world. Many people still mistakenly believe Thailand is a very close ally of the United States. But over the years, and I've written articles and done videos about this, Thailand has begun replacing a lot of their old, out-of-date American equipment with Chinese alternatives. When it came time to order main battle tanks, they ended up with Chinese-made VT-4 main battle tanks, just to give you an idea. And they still buy American equipment to try to play a balancing act. They don't want to end up on America's hit list, even though the U.S. constantly tries to undermine Thailand anyway. So they ended up with used Stryker. These are armored vehicles. But the majority of their equipment now is coming from China, also to a lesser degree, Russia and some European countries. So no, I think this is just a normal part of China doing business. I don't think Israel's going to go to war over this. Israel will do whatever the U.S. tells them to do. And right now they've been tasked with provoking war with Iran. Again, as the Brookings Institution laid out in 2009. Why is the West completely silent on HTS? I.e. ISIS destroying the oldest Christian communities on earth as Israel colonizes that land, because that was the plan. HTS are the proxies the U.S. created, starting all the way back under Bush Jr., all the way up until now, under Trump's second term in office. These were American proxies meant to overrun Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, and eventually Iran. It was always the plan. Maybe I can find it. Hirsch redirection. Let me show you this article here. This is a really old article. This is from all the way back in 2007. Seymour Hirsch wrote this article titled, hold on a second, The Redirection. And in this article, he's warning about the US providing all kinds of support to recruit and militarize and expand the capabilities of extremists, Sunni extremists that espouse a militant vision of Islam and are hostile to America and sympathetic to Al-Qaeda. Which was exactly what they did in Afghanistan against the Soviets. They did this on a much larger scale throughout the so-called war on terror, starting under Bush Jr., leading up to and continuing to today, using groups like HTS, which is just a rebrand of Al-Qaeda, a franchise, an affiliate, whatever you want to call it, of Al-Qaeda that the US has been using to overthrow and destroy and divide all of these countries across the Arab world. So that's why they're completely silent, because they did it. They don't want it to stop. They're not going to admit that that's what they're doing. But if they start talking about it and condemning it, people will say, well, you're dropping bombs on Yemen. For what reason? While this is going on, why don't you drop a bomb on Giuliani's head in Damascus? You know exactly where he is. Why don't you drop a bomb on his head? Because the Trump administration, like the Biden administration, is in on this. They're okay with this. And they're going to continue acting as accomplices for this. That is why. Let me drop this in. This is a very interesting article. If you've got time to read all of these articles that I am posting here, this one is very good. It's long and it's extremely detailed. And it's from 2007. If you read this, it predicts everything. It predicts this war on Hezbollah, the Sunni Shia split, and all the so-called civil wars. War with Syria, 2007. The war with Syria began in 2011. So it foresaw all of it and explained exactly who was doing it and why. And obviously, obviously, this was all part of the plan to rearrange the entire Middle East. Okay, this one. Is it possible that the U.S. military is already deployed in northern Canada and or Greenland wearing Canadian Danish uniforms? Perhaps. I'm serious. Well, they're already in Greenland. They have a military base in Greenland. This is who the U.S., I think it was Vice President J.D. Vance was visiting in Greenland. Just imagine the hubris and the disregard, the disdain for the American public's intelligence on display when the U.S. is wagging its finger at China for complaining about violations of its sovereignty regarding Taiwan, when Taiwan is recognized as part of China under international law. And the U.S. is openly talking about annexing Greenland, which has nothing to do with the United States in any shape, form, or way, except it's of interest to the U.S., so the U.S. wants it. And the fact that Americans are going along with this and talking about this casually, like this is normal, and this isn't the U.S. empire taking the velvet glove off and waving the iron fist around. How anyone could think or be in that mindset at this point, it just astounds me. That's my question. How are people still buying this? Let's see, two more. Please comment on the drawdown of U.S. troops in Syria, perhaps from 3 military bases as reported at Impress News. Thanks. I don't know. That's something you have to keep an eye on. We've been hearing about U.S. drawdowns in Iraq, Syria, and everywhere else for years and years. I'm not going to believe it until CENTCOM says they've withdrawn all troops from Syria. But just think about it. What difference does it make now? All they are now, before they served the purpose, they froze the proxy war that they had previously lost until a time when they could gain the upper hand and overthrow the Syrian government. The Syrian government has been overthrown. The country has been destroyed. Why are they there now? All they serve now are as targets for Iran. When they provoke this war with Iran, Iran can target these U.S. troops. So it would make sense for them to move them out at this point. But I'll believe it when I see definitive proof of it. And let's see here. Who do you think would win a war between the U.S. and Canada? Look, Canada is already an extension of the U.S. It's very odd. Again, I think all of this talk about Canada, Greenland, the Panama Canal, I think this is all a product of urgency. The U.S. is urgently trying to cling to its global empire. It does not want multipolarism to fully emerge, rise, and establish itself. Because once it does, the world will never go back to living under a unipolar system like the U.S. created and benefited from for decades, and before that, the British Empire. So that is what they're doing. And there are probably things they need to do in Canada that they couldn't explain or rationalize or get anyone on board with unless they made this decision to essentially incorporate Canada into the United States. We'll have to wait and see. There's probably something about it in Project 2025. I should try to search through it and find it. The problem with Project 2025, let's go back to that real quick, is again, it's broken up into all of these chapters. And so you have to click on each one. Let's click on one and just see. Let's do Peter Navarro, the case for fair trade. Okay, and it's 59 pages long, and they're all like that. And there's so many chapters, so it's very hard to go through all of it and read it. And like I said, a lot of what is in Project 2025 is what the U.S. establishment has been pursuing for decades. So none of it comes to a shock to me. We remember all the talk about the North American Union. You remember, I still hear people saying President Trump is leading a revolution against globalization. Do you remember the North American Union, how people were scared of that? And now President Trump is just openly talking about annexing Canada. People have to wake up. It's just empire out of control. That is what it is. Let me see. Maybe we can go to an hour and a half. Let me see if there's any other questions. I know I went through the questions, but just give me a minute here. These are awkward pauses would not happen if I had a co-host. I'll just get another couple of questions to last me until hour and 30 minutes. Let's roll. Okay. All right, that's good. Let's do that. I don't know what I didn't read these beforehand. I'm just putting them up on the screen. Question also, what about the U.S. troop movements in Poland? Are they being pulled back before the predictable false flag putting Poland in hot war with Russia? You never know. The U.S. will just drop Article 5. Well, Secretary Hegseth, he told Europe, you need to go into Ukraine to freeze the conflict like we did in Syria, and then you have to expand your military industrial production, and you need to continue rearming, reorganizing the Ukrainian military, expand NATO funding by more than 2 times. And he specifically said no Article 5 because the U.S. is worried that some kind of war will break out between Russia and Europe. And then if there's Article 5, the U.S. will have this obligation to intervene. And what they want is Ukraine is on the verge of collapse. They want the next proxy to be fed into the wood chipper, which is Europe, not America. They don't want to be in the wood chipper. The whole point of having proxies is they go in the wood chipper and you enjoy all of the benefits from the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. And also because they need to pivot and rush to deal with a rising China. So I think there's a lot going on with that. The U.S. has limited military capabilities, just like Russia and China do, and they have to pick and choose where they keep them and where they move them. So a lot of these troop movements are based on prioritizing one theater over the other while they tell their politically captured proxies in Europe to take over for them. Don't you get disgusted with yourself for licking it? Oh, okay. Yes. Okay. That's a really That's a really good one. How do I do that? Have I ever commended Israel? Have I ever defended Israel? Is it because I'm not some pea-brain who thinks this tiny fake country in the Middle East, the US and Britain controlled, is somehow controlling the United States instead? Is that what makes me pro-Israel? Because I don't spend all day and all night screaming about erasing Israel off the map. I mean, people have to be realistic and they have to be mature. You have to think strategically, rationally, logically, not emotionally. People who accuse me of being pro-Israel, I mean, what is anything that I have said ever about being pro-Israeli? And a lot of people think that me condemning Hamas as being obviously fake controlled opposition. Look at you remember, let's go back to the October 7th attacks in 2023. Let's go back to that. Do you remember right after that, everybody was all celebrating. I remember a certain analyst screaming about how Israel was finished. I won't mention any names, but he's prone to screaming. And that day he was screaming about how Israel was finished and how he supports Hamas and Hamas is great and they're going to roll over Israel. And I warned everyone that all Hamas did was roll out the red carpet for Israel to flatten Gaza. And if they paced themselves, they would spend the next year systematically, methodically flattening Gaza. And more than that, they would use it as an opportunity to expand, create a permissive environment across the entire region to wage war in ways they couldn't have done before. And that is exactly what they did. Go back to my videos from around October 7th, 2023. That's what I warned about. And that is literally what happened. A lot of people say, oh, that was just a miscalculation by Hamas. No, it's because they are funded by Qatar, which hosts U.S. military in the region, one of the largest air bases in the region, U.S. air bases in the region, and all of these other countries that have been arming all the other terrorists the U.S. is using to advance its objectives in the region, not the Arab people's objectives, not the Palestinian people's objectives. I'm all for the Palestinian people fighting back. But if your opposition has been captured and they are working to perpetuate violence rather than end it, that's not a resistance movement. And I always compare and contrast with Hezbollah, which is a legitimate resistance organization and has actually protected Lebanon. They ejected Israel out of Lebanon, by the way. That's what a real resistance organization does. They don't invite them in, they eject them out. And that's your way of comparing and contrasting. Look at Hezbollah and how it operates, and look at how Hamas operates. Hamas was taking women and children as hostages. There's no way to defend that. That's Al-Qaeda. That's ISIS. That's what they do. That's not what you'll ever see Hezbollah doing. And that is the biggest clue. If you are too lazy or busy to follow the money and the weapons and the training, at least just look at the tactics and the strategy and the outcomes over and over and over again. So me being clear-headed and not just rabidly foaming at the mouth, hating Israel. You have to understand, Israel is a group of people. Not all of them are on board with this. But if you sit there talking about destroying Israel, pushing it into the ocean every single day, you force everyone, even people who agree with you, to circle the wagons in the for self-preservation, because you're talking about pushing them. Yeah, say they're not people. So you do that. That's what they do. That's what they do to the Palestinians. They say they're not people. So all you're doing is serving as a mirror to the ugliness from certain Israelis. You reflect that. So if you're cheering on the death of Israelis, especially civilians, or you're saying they're not human beings, well, that's what the Israeli administration trains their population to do. That's what we are reacting to. That's what we don't like. And then you're going to turn around and do the exact same thing. So are you helping solve this problem or perpetuate this problem? So people need to People need to think about that. Yes, the Israeli government, the Israeli military are abominations. They are exactly what the US has transformed the Ukrainian government and military into. And they're using it in the exact same way. They have done the same thing here in Asia with certain countries. They do this in every region of the world. And so, some of the loudest and most effective voices condemning Israel are actually Jews. So people need to keep all this in mind. You got to keep a clear head. If you lose yourself to emotions, then you're playing into the enemy's trap. That, the US understands how powerful emotions are. They're using emotions to manipulate their own population with Trump and Biden and the elections and the woke agenda and the conservative agenda. And so, yes, Israel is not, this is a good point right here. Israel is not Jewish. Real Jews don't talk about slaughtering entire populations of people. They basically, there's the 10 Commandments, and that's what they believe in. And you will meet many Jews throughout your life, and they're ordinary people just like you and I, and they have the same sort of, basic morals that every normal human being has. The Israeli government is a-religious. They're not religious. They're not Jewish. Just like Trump is not Christian. The Republicans aren't Christians. They use religion as camouflage, and they use it as a means to manipulate public perception. People got to stop falling for it. They really do. They got to stop doing that. They're playing the public like puppets, and so effectively, because people it seems like they almost enjoy being pulled into this emotional state of just rabid hatred, and they can't snap out of it. Once they're in it, they can't snap out of it. And then they use that as a weapon against you. You're carrying water for them when you allow yourself to be carried away like that. What was I talking about? I still got two more. I still got two more questions here. And that proves that I don't read these comments before I don't read them before I post them up on the screen. It sometimes seems there are rival factions in the U.S. deep state. Would you agree? No. There are many different interests in the so-called deep state. Have all of these different corporate financier interests, and they're not all on the same page. This is why they spend so much money across so many different policy think tanks. The policy think tanks spend all day coming to some sort of consensus. That's what they do. They are funded by multiple different types of industry, types of financial activities, banks, big pharma, big ag, arms manufacturers. They come to a consensus. They produce policy papers like this Brookings Institution paper or Project 2025 because enough of them are on board for enough. There's enough consensus. And then the policy papers are taken by lawyers. They are turned into bills, and they go to Washington with lobbyists to get signed off on by everyone on both sides of the aisle. You notice how there's not really that much opposition to President Trump's tariffs. It's because this is what they're always talking. If you listen to the congressional hearings, which are 3 to 5 hours long sometimes, this is all they talk about. We need to decouple from China before we go to war with them. If we're still coupled to their economy when we go to war, and we have to go to war with them, because we cannot allow non-white Asian people to be the most powerful nation on earth. We have to put them back in their place, but we can't do it if we're coupled to their economy. So we need to decouple. Republican, Democrat, this is what they are all saying. It's what they're all saying. So that's why they're going along. That's why President Biden continued all of Trump's tariffs during his 4 years, and Trump picked up right where Biden left off. And this one, what is Turkey's role in Syria? Well, they were one of several proxies that aided the U.S. in arming, training, backing, and then eventually invading militants to invade Syria. And then the Turkish military itself invaded and carved out a buffer zone in northern Syria. And this is exactly what the U.S. now wants Europe to do in Ukraine. So Turkey's role in Syria is an obedient puppet of the U.S. It is a member of NATO. They do a lot of things that I think chafe at the collective West. It's hard to tell how much of that is It's hard to tell how much of that Erdogan wants a neo-Ottoman empire, maybe. But so much of what he does, even when the West pretends they're against it, so much of what he does and what Turkey does helps the U.S. in its global objectives rather than obstructs it. And that is not going to help Turkey itself and its best interests in the long term. Like, is this true? 91% of Congress is Jewish? I think you better check your numbers again. I'm pretty sure it isn't. That's because many people were telling me this. For many years, I looked at board members and, I was looking into it to see how many were Jewish, how many were Christian. There's a large number of Jews, people who claim to be Jewish, involved in government and business in the collective West. But who are these people? These are people who have for generations, for centuries, lived in the West. They are Westerners. You're acting like there's some sort of alien civilization from outside the West that came in. They have been in the collective West for centuries. They are part of the West. And maybe it's my perspective here as having lived in Asia my entire adult life. You will see some not so bright people here in Southeast Asia. There's people like this everywhere you go. And they're like, ethnic Chinese people run everything in my country. The Chinese are running everything. Because there are a lot of ethnic Chinese families like in Thailand or in Malaysia, just because the way their culture is, they raise their children, they're more diligent, they're more hardworking, they stick together as a family from one generation to the next. And so they're successful and they end up in the highest levels of business and government in these respective countries. So there's not some sort of Chinese conspiracy to take over all of Asia. A lot of these ethnic Chinese business people or politicians are, opposed to one another and are fighting for power and money. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. So you can't always just, hold on a second. Yes, this is it exactly. Losers always need someone to blame. That's what it is. So these are the people you always hear complaining about this here in Southeast Asia are more or less they're losers. And they need to blame ethnic Chinese for the reason why it's not because they take their whole paycheck and they waste it on whiskey, cigarettes, and lottery tickets. Couldn't possibly be that. That's the big obstacle between them and having a more successful life. It has to be the ethnic Chinese. And so the ethnic Chinese here in Asia are blamed and serve as scapegoats in a very similar way. Jewish people are scapegoated in the collective West. Again, add up the money, add it all up, think logically, rationally. It's like, look at Israel. Do you think Israel and its policies as a country in the Middle East, do you think that is they're maximizing their policy for their own best interest or as proxies of the US? They are constantly at war. They are a militarized civilization. Their people are unstable because of how they've been brainwashed and regimented for being this constant proxy of first British Empire and now American Empire in the region. They could be doing so much better if they just followed their own best interests, which would be to cooperate with everyone in the region rather than fight with everyone in the region. I don't know if people know this, but outside of Israel, the largest population of Jews are actually in Iran. They actually live in Iran. And a lot of these Jewish communities were deliberately driven out of these countries because of destabilization orchestrated by the US and the Israeli government and military. So again, people have to, when you find yourself being pitted against other groups of people instead of billionaires, it's billionaires who put profit over purpose. That is your enemy. And if you cannot see that, it's because you're allowing yourself to be blinded by propaganda. It's as simple as that. It's as simple as that. Let's see. I know I said an hour and 30. I think we'll end it right there. So this live stream, I'll try to do another live stream next Sunday. I will tell everyone that I usually invite well ahead of time to try to get some more people in on the discussion. Again, keep an eye out for the U.S. is maintaining multiple conflicts and proxy conflicts and preparing for conflicts. Keep an eye on these non-negotiations the U.S. has with Russia. What they're trying to do is freeze the conflict, Minsk 3 plus a Syria style freeze. That's what they're trying to do in Ukraine. Russia isn't buying it, but keep an eye on that. Keep an eye on the U.S. and its inexplicable involvement in Iran's internal affairs and its nuclear program. Is none of America's business. The very fact that they've injected themselves in as the global policeman, even as everyone swears Trump is pivoting the U.S. away from the role of global policeman, keep an eye on that. And remember, President Trump is overseeing a violent, unnecessary war against Yemen. They're targeting, CENTCOM is bragging about targeting civilian infrastructure to undermine the pro-Iranian Ansar Allah organization, but they're as always, they are destroying the lives of civilians first and foremost. And also keep an eye on the tariffs, the trade war, and preparations for war with China. The tariffs are meant to isolate China, and this continued pressure the U.S. is putting on China militarily, especially in regards to Taiwan. They're trying to trigger a conflict just like they did with Russia and Ukraine, so they can justify even more drastic measures like cutting off Chinese maritime shipping worldwide. There was also recently the U.S. talking about fining or putting fees on Chinese-built ships that come to American ports, essentially making it impossible for Chinese-built ships to come to American ports. So you can see this is a full spectrum war the U.S. is already waging on China. It just hasn't turned into a direct armed conflict yet. But the U.S. is already waging war with China by proxy. There's U.S.-backed separatists in Pakistan and in Myanmar attacking Chinese infrastructure, killing Chinese citizens, engineers, an attempt on the Chinese ambassador to Pakistan. Yes, delisting Chinese companies. Yes, the whole works, everything. They're going to complete war with China, and they are priming the U.S. economy for this. They are preparing the U.S. economy and the American people for war with China. And why? Because China poses a threat to the United States? No, because the U.S. does not accept a larger, more powerful nation having more of a say globally than the U.S. It cannot accept the end of its unipolar world order and a greater balance, a fair balance of power worldwide. They cannot accept it. And they're willing to go to war and kill millions of people. And they're already destroying the lives of millions of people to try to reverse this. So keep an eye on all of that. I will release a video probably around Wednesday, and we'll be back for a live stream on Sunday. I want to thank everyone who joined me live and everyone who's checking in on this live stream afterwards. Check the video description below for all the places you can find and follow my work. I've also included Angelo's all his information in there because he is the co-host of this, and he was the one who convinced me to start doing videos in the first place. And I hope to have him back next week. And until then, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.